This morning, slightly before 6 a.m., which is I'm not a morning person, one of my cats came into the bed, all snuggly and cute, and then I got the distinct whiff of cat shit. So I turned on the light, and sure enough, there was cat shit all over my pillow because he had planted his butt on my pillow next to my head. I need a nap. Hello, friends. So a couple of you asked me to do a video on basic financial advice, and my first thought was that I don't really want to do that because I'm far from an expert on finances. Like, if you are somebody who follows finance in any way, nothing in this video is going to be a revelation to you. But then my next thought was, well, I'll recommend a resource for basic financial advice, and I couldn't think of one that would have really told me everything I needed to know when I started out, with adulthood. When I was first learning about finance, a lot of the books I read or the, blogs and posts, whatever I was looking at, they tended to assume you kind of already knew what some basic terms meant. And it took me a while to kind of puzzle out exactly what those things were. And I've certainly learned you can't assume that people know even the most basic stuff. So I'm going to try not to assume that you know too much of anything. Also, I had very unusual financial circumstances through my adult life because I am self-employed, I am in a creative field, and my income has been extremely erratic, so erratic. I've had years where I made $0 sandwiched between years where I made $70,000, and I never knew it was coming. So that's extremely unpredictable. So a lot of the things that I read weren't really geared to my circumstances. So this is what I would tell myself when I turned 18. Obviously, it's America-centric. So if you live in another country, you're going to have different circumstances and it might not be that helpful to you. And it's based on my unusual circumstances. It is not in any way meant as financial advice. It's just, as with any of the things I talk about on this channel, if it resonates with you or you find it helpful in some way, then that's awesome. I'm sure a lot of you watching, I know I have a tendency to watch finance videos that I know are not going to tell me anything new. It's just kind of nice to see the things that I do know reinforced over and over. It kind of helps keep me on track. So I know some of you are going to watch this video even though you're going to know everything in it already. You might know more than me. You might leave me comments like, you're wrong, that's bad advice. I hope you're a little more polite about it, but I expect that. This is not gospel in any way. This is just what I have learned, and I still have a lot to learn. My name is Lydia Foxglove, and I'm a fantasy author. I've been making my living as a novelist since 2009. I've been both traditionally published and indie published, and I also sell on eBay on the side, particularly in some years when writing has been a little slow, but most of my money has been from writing. So the first thing I want to say is that money is just a very psychological thing. You can hear all kinds of advice, and you probably know in your head that certain things are probably smart, like saving money, but that doesn't mean that it's always easy to practice what you know would be a good idea. It's pretty common to spend more money than you really want to spend just because it's hard to resist all the temptations of life, having fun. But on the flip side of that, it's also possible to be too conservative with your savings, too frugal to the point of being stingy and just not being able to let go. I've kind of fallen on both sides of the spectrum at different points in life. I've had times in life where I spent too much and I was just chasing a dopamine hit and kind of satisfying the kid inside me who couldn't buy all the things they wanted. And I've also had times where I was freaking out about money all the time to the point where I was getting excessively stingy. And I'm also a very conservative investor because my money has been so erratic that even though I know Statistically, I'd probably be richer if I was a little less conservative with where I put my money. But it's so hard to do because I've just had some very long dry spells where I made almost no money. So I'll get into that a little more, but I just wanted to note that, like, you can get all the basic advice about numbers in the world, but in the end, dealing with the psychology of money will be the most beneficial thing that you can do for your finances. And this video isn't really about that, but it's perfectly normal to not do everything perfectly, and don't let perfect be the enemy of good when it comes to managing your money. You're not going to get it all right, but if you get a few things better, then that will help. Also, my priority in life is to have more time to pursue my creative projects and have more freedom to not always write to market. Not everyone shares my priorities. Some people's highest priority in life is to save money to have amazing vacations a few times a year. Some creative people love writing to market or creating art to market, what have you. And those are all perfectly valid as well. So I just wanted to note, this is my priority when I talk about what I would do with my money, is that I want free time and freedom to pursue my art more than I want like material stuff, vacations, etc. Okay, so when I turned 18, I had a very low paying job. It was like $6 an hour or something. And I worked part-time. I was extremely frugal. I did not go to college because I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to pursue that first before I made any other big decisions, spending a lot of time and money going to college. And I had like a couple $1,000s in savings. So the first thing that I did was to open just like a local bank account, a checking account, and a savings account, which is just kind of like the old school first financial step. I still feel like this is a perfectly fine thing to do when you only have like a very basic emergency fund. You're not really going to get much of any return on your money, but it's such a small amount anyway. And I still like to have a local bank where if I have some kind of question or something, I can deal with a real person. But you could also just open an online high yield savings account from the start. The difference between like your local bank and a high yield savings account is usually that the high yield savings account is online only and there's not a branch you can go to. As a result, they don't have to pay for all that infrastructure, and they're giving you a bigger return on your money that's just sitting there. So if you're just starting out, you can just do that. Very simple. If you're making terrible wages and you're barely making ends meet, there's really no need to think about much more than just trying to build up some emergency fund. The mistake I made when I was 18 is that my parents had always taught me not to go into debt, and I got a bunch of offers for credit cards when I turned 18, and I didn't apply for any of them because I was like, I'll just pay cash. This was very stupid because I quickly found out that if you don't get a credit card when you're 18, at least at this time, I was talking to my younger sister and she said it was a little easier for her to get like a really basic credit card when she was a little older, but either way, it's easiest to establish credit when you're 18. Just get one credit card and be very disciplined about using it. If you can't be disciplined about using it, then I would just open it and then put it, tell your family to confiscate it or put it in a chunk of ice or whatever it takes to not use this card. But I was a very disciplined person, so I would have been fine having a credit card if I had understood how they worked, which is if you just charge the things you really need and like what you have money for, and then you pay it off at the end of the month. If you get a credit card that has like some cash back or points, you'll get a tiny bit of money back. Not enough that it is worth charging things that you're going to pay interest on just to get points or cash back. But if you are going to pay it off every month, then it's a nice little bonus. And then just by charging things throughout the month, paying it off religiously at the end of the month, then you'll build up decent credit. You don't need to carry a balance to build credit. I see people think that sometimes, and you don't need it. It'll take some time, especially when you first get a credit card. You usually have like a really low limit, and you'll keep getting like your credit card report will be like your balance is too high compared to your credit, and you'll have to kind of wait for them to raise your credit limit over time. But I wouldn't worry about it. Just you can even pay it off a couple times throughout the month depending on like what your credit limit is compared to how much you're spending. But the big thing is just keep track. The other thing I like about credit cards is that it's really easy for you to track what you bought at the end of the month because you have like a very easy list of all the things you bought on your credit card statement. So at the end of every month now, and I wish I had done this from the start, I look at my credit card statements and I look at my bank account and I write down all the money I made and all the money I spent, and I write it down in several different categories. Food, business expenses, regular like recurring charges, emergency, that's like, one-time payments for anything that was needed that isn't going to be bought again but was like necessary, not fun stuff, and personal, which is the fun stuff. And by doing that every month, I don't set like you must spend only this much in each category personally, but just by looking at it every month, it gives me a regular sense of like where I might be spending too much, or things that I could, like subscriptions I could cancel. Just keeps me on track with everything. And since it's all on the credit card statement, it doesn't really take very long to do this. It probably takes me an hour a month to go through all the statements, write them all down, add everything up, pay the credit cards for the month, etc. And then I'm done. So those are the things that I would do first. If I could go back in time and tell myself, I'd say open a basic bank account, get a credit card, pay it off every month, watch it like a hawk, and just write down all your expenses. So once you have the basics, then you want to build up an emergency fund. And the recommended emergency fund amount is usually 3 to 6 months of what you need to live on. But I like to have a whole year because my income has been so erratic that there are times when I have legit needed a full year of emergency expenses and I have used like all of it. I like to have a big emergency fund. For me, like it's not like what you normally spend in a year. It's like the most, trimmed down budget, not doing a lot of fun things, but just this is when I need to survive for a year. If the first thing you did was open an account at a local bank, well, you only want to keep like the bare minimum in the local bank account. Otherwise, you want to put it somewhere that's making a better return. So your options for that are a high yield savings account or a CD. Generally, there are some other options which at certain times might be more beneficial. Like there was a brief period where I-bonds were giving a really great return when inflation was really high, but I'm not going to get into all that in this video. Like just your basic options would be a high yield savings account or a CD. And the return currently is not like terrible because interest rates have been very high, but there is talk that they might lower, and through most of my adult life, interest rates were very low. So your return, it's not a lot. I want to take this moment to explain interest rates because this is one of the biggest things that in hindsight seems so obvious, but when I was young, I just didn't fully grasp what an interest rate meant. Like when I'd see like APR on a credit card, I didn't really know what that meant. So a lot of you will be like rolling your eyes like, of course I know what an interest rate is, but I'm gonna bet there's a few of you that don't like fully grasp what an interest rate is. To put it very simply, if you have a bank account or a CD that says it has like a 4% annual interest, annual return, that means that if you put $1,000 in there at the end of the year, 4%, it'll be worth 4% more, so it would be worth $1,040. And if you took out a loan at a 4% interest rate, if the loan was $1,000, by the end of the year you would owe $1,040. So what that means is if you have a few different debts, like a house payment, a car payment, student loan, credit card debt, and then you're looking to invest, in the most basic level, if any of your loans have a higher interest rate than the return of where you're looking to put your money, then it's not really worth putting your money in any kind of savings until you paid off those loans. But if you have a loan with a very low interest rate, like a mortgage on a house might have a pretty low interest rate, then it would not be worth paying off your house if you could get a better return elsewhere. Like usually the stock market will give you a better return than the interest rate on your house. So it's not very logical to pay off your house instead of investing in the stock market if you have a lot of extra money. That's like the most raw, logical way to look at interest rates, but there are a number of exceptions for various reasons. You might want to get into a habit of investing even if you have a student loan that's at a higher rate than your return, because just putting away some kind of investments is such a good habit to get into. Or you might want to pay off your house even though you could get a slightly better return elsewhere, because you're less likely to ever pull that money out and use it, and you'll just have the peace of mind of knowing that you don't have this payment. So there's a fair number of people who pay off their house even though they know it's not like technically the best thing to do, just because it's very simple and it gives you a certain sense of peace of mind. And that's where money gets psychological, because you're probably going to be a lot richer if you put the money in the stock market rather than paying off the house. But the house is guaranteed. You've locked the money up. It's not easy to get the money out. And unlike the stock market, you know exactly what you're getting, whereas the stock market could have a crash and set you back for a few years. But if you're looking long term, usually it's better to invest in the stock market. But where was I? Yes, the emergency fund. So a high yield savings account is just like any other savings account. It gives you, currently I think they're returning about like 4 to 5% annually. And you put your money in there and you can take it out and move it around at any time. Then you have a CD, or a certificate of deposit, which is also like a bank account. It's guaranteed. It can't go down in price. And the rates on those are very similar right now to the bank account return, but you can lock in the rate for years. So let's say your bank account is returning 4.5% interest annually, but the CD is only returning 4%, and you're locking up your money for 2 years. Why would you choose the CD when it's giving less? Well, you might be guessing that your savings account interest rate is going to go down if interest rates are lowered by the government, whereas you are guaranteed the 4% with the CD. So when you're thinking about that emergency fund, you're kind of calculating, am I going to want to have that money always at hand, or is it okay to tie it up for a little while? Since it is an emergency fund, I say generally you're going to want to have it in the bank account and not tie it up in a CD. So then we get into investments. Once you have enough savings in your emergency funds that you feel comfortable, like you would have enough time to recover if something happened, whatever that circumstance is, then you can start thinking about like putting some money in some real investments. Now, while high yield savings accounts and CDs are currently returning somewhere in the 4 to 5% range, which is the highest it's been, since inflation is high. It hasn't really been that good since I think like the 80s, maybe the 90s. I don't know. I was a kid, so I don't know exactly when, but I know throughout my adult life, the returns were generally quite bad, so they might be bad again relatively soon. But even so, the stock market has returned on average about 10%, or adjusted for inflation, 7%. But 10% versus 4 to 5%. It's a lot bigger return, and over the years of your life, that extra return matters a lot. So it's good to get some money in the stock market, and it's good to do it as soon as possible. Now, I was born in 1982, which means like right about as I was hitting adulthood, there was the dot-com bubble burst and the stock market took a big hit. And then in 2008, we had terrible financial crash. And that made me kind of jittery about the stock market, at least about putting money into it kind of long term. I did put some money in right like when the stocks were bottomed out, because that was the first time I really made real money, and they were really low. So I thought there's no way they're not going to go up. But like I was always afraid to keep them there. So I'd put them in, and then the stock market was like bouncing back, and then I like took them out like, oh my God, I can't believe it would go up any more than this, which just is kind of a juvenile understanding of the stock market. So the best thing that you can do from the youngest age possible is to start putting money in the stock market. And this easiest, simplest, kind of safest way to do that is just to get a basic index fund. An index fund is kind of an overview of a larger part of the stock market. So rather than saying like, I'm going to buy shares in Apple or Tesla, and then you could take a big hit if something happens with one of those companies, you're instead getting an index fund that might have like 1% share of Apple, 1% share of Tesla, 1% share of Google, you know, like down the line. It's just like a overview of the stock market. So you have like a little bit of all the big companies rather than trying to pick which ones are going to do well. That way, if like tech stocks take a dive, but the rest of the stock market is a little more resilient, you own a little bit of all of those things. And there are a number of different index funds. I have mostly the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, Admiral Shares, which is the code VTSAX, and I buy it through the Vanguard company. But there are some other ones as well, you know, it's if you want to dig into it. So most of my stock market purchases are in an IRA, which is a retirement account. You're penalized if you pull the money out before you retire, which is fine because I just want to sit it there and forget about it. Now, when I was younger, this would not have been possible because the first thing that I did was build up the emergency fund, and then the second thing I did was save to buy a house. But it depends on what your goals are. Houses were a lot cheaper in 2012 when I bought my first house. In fact, they were kind of bottomed out because the effects of the 2008 recession. The stock market bounced back while the housing market was still in decline. So 2012 was kind of the bottom for real estate, and that was when I got into the real estate market. So that was a very wise decision at that point. Currently, house prices are a lot higher, so whether it makes sense for you to buy a house is just something that you should look into. I'm not going to get into that in this video, but yeah, in 2012 it made a lot of sense to buy a house. But I do wish that at a younger age I had started putting money in an index fund. I didn't know that they existed, so obviously that's why I didn't. For a little while I put some money in some mutual funds. Mutual funds are like chosen by someone who manages the fund. So an actual person is like picking stocks and then pooling them together, whereas an index fund is just like a rather impersonal, broad-based view of the market. I feel like mutual funds were more popular back then, but index funds generally have a better return. You're not like paying anybody to manage them. And when you put your money in a IRA retirement fund, which obviously being self-employed, I do not have access to a 401k. So an IRA is really all I have. And I think currently you can put like $7,000 a year in an IRA. There's two different types. The IRA saves you money on your taxes in that year, like the money that you put into it. That amount is taken from your like taxable income, so you save some money on your taxes if you use an IRA. Then there's a Roth IRA where you don't get the tax benefits in the moment, but when you get the money out, when you retire, then you don't pay any taxes. Whereas the other IRA, you pay the taxes later in life. So you're trying to guess, like, am I going to be making more money now or am I going to be making more money later? If I understand this correctly, because I get a little confused about IRA versus Roth IRA to this day. So if somebody has more information exactly on that, feel free to share. And I really don't know. So I have the regular IRA and there is no way for me to predict whether I'll be making more money now or later. It's impossible. So I'm just going to take the tax benefit now because why not? Now, if you max out your IRA and you want to have another tax advantaged retirement account, if you get a health insurance plan that has a high deductible, like if you don't have a lot of medical expenses, and it comes with a health savings account, the health savings account, or HSA, acts fairly similarly to an IRA. You get the tax benefit when you put money into it, and you'll get a penalty if you withdraw money from it before you hit retirement age. But the big difference is it's a health savings account. So the idea with an HSA is that you can take money out of it only to pay for medical expenses. So if you need the money sooner, you do have that one way to get it out. But other than that, it works fairly similarly to an IRA. So you can have the $7,000 a year in your IRA and I think like $3,700 in an HSA. Let's just say it's like $11,000 a year you can put in a tax advantage retirement account. And if you can just manage to do that every year, that's really all you need to do to retire comfortably. At least, if your lifestyle is fairly basic like mine. A lot of people are anxious about putting their money in the stock market. And certainly I was one of those people because I had lived through a couple of pretty bad market crashes. And the 2008 market crash, it took some years for the stock market to get back to where it was, much less to make a return. I think it was like 4 or 5 years before you would have started to really make a profit if you had bought like just before the crash. So that's a decently long time. But if this money is your retirement account, you don't need to worry about the stock market's ups and downs, even if it's a bad crash like 2008. Just in the past couple weeks, when I was first writing the script for this video, the stock market had a couple of really bad days, and I saw a lot of people freaking out, like, should I dump my stocks? And my feeling is I don't put money in the stock market that I need very quickly, and therefore I don't pay any attention to whether the stock market is up or down unless either I know that I need to withdraw that money soon for some reason, which I should note, let's say you don't want to actually put it in a retirement account and you don't want to tie it up for like the rest of your life, but you have an emergency fund. Obviously, you can put it in index funds just the same. Let's say you want the money like in 5 years. It's probably a good idea to put that money in an index fund, but in that case, you might want to pay some attention to the stock market because, if you put it in there, you want it in 5 years and then like 2 years has passed, the market's suddenly tanking. Well, sure, you may want to pull that out to be safe. There's a lot of, inner calculations, because the thing about the market is people will say time in the market always beats timing the market. And what that means is if you try to guess like when the stock market's going to go up and down, you can't. Nobody knows that. So you need to make your decisions about your stocks based just on your personal timeline and not on whether like Wall Street is panicking. Pulling your money in and out of the stock market, trying to guess like, oh my gosh, it's down now, it's going down, I should pull it out now, and then trying to guess when to put it back in, that is a bad idea. Only think about it if you're in need of that money relatively soon, Or if you kind of have some money hanging around and the stock market takes like a huge dive, you might want to like put a little more in than you normally would. I have done that on occasion. Other than that, the best thing you can do is just invest on a regular schedule, and then don't think about it until you get close to retirement or close to a time when you know you're going to need that money in the next 2 years or so. Most of the time, that's going to be pretty safe. There's always the possibility of a bigger crash where it might take like 5 years. It's not very common, so normally I probably would take that risk. There is also some fear with some people, and I have this fear sometimes too because I worry about climate change. But what if like the whole thing just turns to shit? Well, my feeling with that is if things really go downhill with like the whole world, or the stock market is just like down and stays down forever, well, that's just going to change the whole status quo of the entire world so much that it's not even worth worrying about. I feel like it's a good idea to put my money in the stock market because that's where like millionaires and billionaires have their money. So the most powerful people in the world have a vested interest in making sure that the stock market stays solvent. And if they fail at that, the whole arrangement of society is going to be different in ways that I can't even anticipate. So it's always nice to have a little diversity. I do enjoy like owning a home, for example, but I'm not going to worry about the possibility of like a global financial collapse, because that's like trying to plan for any possible natural disaster or getting a terminal illness. Like there's all kinds of terrible things that could happen to you. You could get hit by a truck tomorrow. So I'm going to do the sensible thing that has worked and not worry about it too much. Now, the reason that you do want to try to save money regularly as early in life as possible is because of compound interest. Compound interest is some kind of mathematical wizardry that happens when you put money in the stock market and then you just wait for decades. And somehow the return goes like whoop. And every time I look at the chart, I'm almost like, I don't even understand how this is possible. But, you know, it's math. So to give you an example, if you started maxing out your IRA and your HSA and put about $11,000 in the market, about $900 a month. So if you were able to start when you were, let's say 25 years old, and you wanted to retire when you were 65, that would be 40 years. The interest rate is about 10%. And by the time that you retired, you would have almost $4.8 million. So that's $900 a month for 40 years. Or in other words, you will have actually invested $440,000 and it will have turned into $4.8 million. That is crazy, right? So the time is a big deal. Now, if you started when you were 45 and you wanted to retire at 65 and you did the same thing, you would retire with $618,000. Such a huge difference if you can start saving early versus later in life. It's just astounding. But, you know, a lot of people who are 25 are not making 900 extra dollars a month that they can just stash away without ever needing to touch it until they're 65 years old. I certainly was not in that boat. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about, particularly for self-employed people, is taxes. Because when I started out as a writer, I had been working in retail, so my income was extremely low and my taxes were just very basic and straightforward. And then my first year as a writer, I made like $40,000 when I sold my first 2 books. And I had no idea how taxes really worked because I never had to think about it before. And I'd heard a lot of people who had their own business always saying like, oh, that's fine, it's tax deductible, it's tax deductible. And I started thinking that like there's some way you get stuff for free when you have a business. And I also just didn't understand how like the tax structure worked. So if you are in this boat, which I know some people are, how taxes work when you're self-employed is like if you make $40,000, then you will pay taxes based on that $40,000. Except if you buy anything that is a business expense, you can deduct that from the amount you made, and then your taxes will be based on the remainder. So if you made $40,000, but you spent $1,000 on a new laptop, then the IRS will say, okay, you actually really made $39,000 and you'll be taxed based on that. So if you make a lot of money, then it makes sense to see if you can rack up some extra business expenses that are a little more fun. So this is partly why you might see successful creative people doing more travel, because it's lowering they're basically getting a big discount on their travel is what they're getting. Because if you make like $100,000 and you take a $2,000 business trip to a writing conference, then that's coming off the top of your income and you're getting a big discount on your trip, because taxes are based on brackets. So I don't know offhand like what the real brackets are, but let's say like the first $10,000 you make is not taxed at all. Then the next $10,001 to $20,000 is taxed at, 10%. So you're paying $1,000 in taxes on that chunk. Then the next chunk, you're paying a little higher amount of taxes. As you make more money, you have more incentive to have business expenses because it comes off the highest tax bracket and lowers you down. So if your tax rate on your highest chunk of income is like 40%, then and you take a business trip, you're saving 40% on that actual cost of the trip. Whereas if you're not making a whole lot of money as a creative person, you might only be saving like 15% on the trip. It's a common misconception that the tax brackets work that like as soon as, let's say, you make $1 that puts you into the next tax bracket, then that percentage of that bracket is taken off your entire income. But that is not how it works. Each amount is taxed in its own bracket, if that makes sense. And your taxes are higher when you're self-employed. If you come from like a salary job into self-employment, you often get a shock because your employer pays like this extra tax for like Social Security, Medicare, or whatever. It's like 13%, I want to say. So you'll suddenly pay a lot more taxes than you were used to based on your income from a salary job to self-employment, because suddenly you're paying this whole extra percent. And you also need to pay quarterly estimated taxes if you want to avoid a penalty. Usually what I do is I just kind of try to throw like about 25% of what I make in a quarterly tax payment. I just kind of rough it, and I often do end up paying like a tiny penalty, like $30 or something. And then some years I overestimate it and I end up getting a bunch of money back. When my income is very erratic, it's very hard to guess at the estimated taxes. Taxes when you're self-employed are just so fun. But, don't get surprised by that. And make sure you understand how those tax brackets actually work. You don't need to freak out about making more money. It is not going to suck money away from your income. And tax deductible is more valuable when you're making more money. So I think those are all the bases that I can think of to cover. I hope this all made sense. I tried to keep it like fairly simple and explain some basic concepts, but I know it can still be confusing. But yeah, that's all the financial advice that I would give myself when I was younger. And all the financial advice I figured out slowly but surely over time. There's still situations I've never had to face, like whether I should incorporate my business. I haven't really made enough money for that to really make sense, but for some people it does. And then as I get older and closer to retirement, I'm probably going to want to look into some other, like, move some money out of the stock market. I haven't really researched that very much. If you want to know more about money, a lot of what I know was learned from financial Reddits, which, yes, there are a lot of like toxic finance bros on Reddit, but I spent a lot of time at the FIRE Reddits, which is Financial Independence Retire Early. I am not really trying to retire early, but I do want to be financially independent, like as much as is realistically possible. So I got a lot of good advice there just by lurking. I do not engage. However, the FIRE movement can lean like exceedingly frugal and exceedingly towards like working really hard when you're young and like barely even enjoying your life until you get to the point where you can FIRE. So I also really like Ramit Sethi's I Can Teach You to Be Rich YouTube channel, which talks more about like the psychology of money and encourages you to think in a little bit more of an abundant way and like what your rich life would look like. And my rich life is always just like, I want free time to read books and do jigsaw puzzles, which is not what anybody who appears on there ever says. They are always like, I want to travel to France 4 times a year. And he's like, let's look at your budget and see if maybe you can do that. So I don't always relate to the people that appear on his channel, but I feel like it's a good balance to the FIRE community. I also think that Your Money or Your Life is a great classic financial book, especially for people who really want to be sensible and enjoy their life. But I've also read like every book on finances at my library. It took me like a number of books to actually figure everything out because they all kind of, like, a lot of them are geared toward a different audience than me. So I had to read a lot of them to kind of piece it all together. So I hope this was helpful, especially if you're young and clueless about money. Feel free to ask me any questions. Feel free to comment with anything that you have learned or might add to this conversation, particularly for creative people who are running their own business and might also have kind of an erratic income. And don't forget to like and subscribe. My channel generally talks about the creative life, both like the actual writing, fantasy world building, as well as like the practical and psychological side of the creative life. So if you enjoy all that, feel free to stick around. I also have a Patreon and Substack, which both have the same content. They are both free for like just to get the latest news. And I also have a $5 paid tier that I have a monthly dedicated chat on my Discord server. I have a monthly video that Patreons vote on, etc. And thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye. Yeah, you're pretty cute. You're pretty cute. You're starting to get kind of energetic. Uh-oh. 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 The party's over. The party's over. We're gonna have to eject. We're gonna have to eject you. Yeah. You're so ferocious. You're so ferocious. Yeah. Yeah, what? Bye.